Hello and welcome to chapter number 3. Today we're going to talk about surfaces. This is by far the hardest to explain. As you can see all these lines, I've been filming this again and again and I just get stuck into explaining too many things and it just gets so confusing that I even lose my own trail of thoughts. So I'm going to try and simplify this as much as possible. I will probably make some mistake on what I'm saying. If you're an advanced painter, I know what you're going to say on certain things, but take it with a pinch of salt. That's what I'm saying. In order to be very accurate, this video is going to be about 3 hours long and it's not going to work. So I'm going to simplify everything and also I'm going to tell you my way of doing it. There are different ways of doing it and there are better ways of doing it in certain parts, especially when you're talking about glass or rubber or plastic. But I'm going to tell you how to get a really good result with your work in most cases. And I think this is where it comes down to. These techniques I'm about to give you will work in most cases and you'll get a good job. Sometimes there'll be exceptions and I'm not going to talk about those, otherwise we'll just go on forever. Okay, so when I started my career, I was going to a market in London where I was doing custom t-shirts and custom kicks, and I realized rubber is a really tricky one, it's hard to paint. There isn't really a paint that will stick to rubber for a long time unless it gets branded onto the rubber like a tire with markings on it. So rubber will just leave out, I just won't talk about it. Fabric, again when I was doing t-shirts and hoodies and stuff, I realized there isn't a way to prepare fabric. You just paint it on top and then afterwards to make it secure, you cover, say if that's the hoodie I'm painting on, I would cover it with a cloth or a piece of fabric and then I'd use an iron to just iron the hoodie. And with the heat, that would just cure or set the paint into the hoodie or the t-shirt, then it can be washed and it would be fine. Glass. Glass is a tricky one, so I'll just get it out of the way straight away. The only way you can paint glass is with the strongest paint that I know, that's enamel. Enamel paint is great, however it's thick, and by the way nowadays you can get water-based enamel. Stay away from that stuff, it's not real enamel and it won't work well, it's not very good. So if you get real enamel, you can just use a brush and you can paint directly onto the glass and it just won't come off, it'll be really strong. Unless you're using acetone to take it off, acetone is pretty much the way to go. But apart from that, it'll be fine. You don't need to do anything to it, just let it dry. Once it's dry, it just won't come off. You don't need to apply any heat, it'll just be fine. If you want to do like a full-on artwork, a portrait thing with tones and stuff, what you need to do is to prepare it with sandpaper. Sandpaper is measured in grids. 40 grids is probably the biggest I've used. I think you probably have, no, 20 grids I think is the thickest I've used. I'm sure you probably got even coarser, is what I was looking for. But whatever, let's say you want to do glass, you would get a sandpaper that's either 40 or 60, and those things are like, you can see the stones in the paint on the paper. I mean, it's like, it looks really rough. If you use that on a piece of glass, you would scrape it, you would put all these marks. After you've done that, you can use something a bit smoother, like a 120, to make it a bit better. Whether you're doing it by hand or using a machine. And once you've done that, you can just apply your artwork, and once you've done that, you can just lacquer it. I will explain with these ones, with the plastic, the metal and the wood, how to do the lacquer, how to apply the lacquer, and indeed with glass it would be the same thing. With glass there wouldn't be a primer, there isn't a glass primer you can get. So again, you can apply heat and stuff, and this is what I meant. I'm not going to go into that. If you want to, if you really want to learn about how to paint glass with a lot of freedom, either send me an email or something, or ask somebody or watch somebody's video that paints on glass. I don't want this video to be too long. Cool. So these are the way. So I want to get these three into the same level, and that would be the artwork, and then I'll go into the finishing. So to paint on a surface to get a good result, actually let's talk about walls before I go on to these ones. Walls or any porous surfaces like bricks, plaster, concrete, cement, blocks, all that stuff, they work like a sponge. You apply the paint and it will just go straight into it. So, and wood is kind of similar. So all you have to do is just put some water-based paint on top of your bricks, your walls, your plaster, and if you do that a couple of times, then you're pretty much going to be set. I want to use colors. I want to use colors with this. I think it'll make more sense probably. So we're going to assume all of these 4 surfaces are clean. So there's no dust, there's no grease. What's the third one? And it's not wet. So when you're painting with water-based paint, in a lot of cases it can be wet. So if you're painting a wall, it doesn't actually matter if it's wet as long as it's not dripping. But again, I'm confusing even myself. So let's just say those 4 surfaces are not wet, they're not dusty, and they're not greasy. And I'm sure you've read that on the labels. So on the wall, what you would want to do, in this tutorial, I just want to address that this is to get the best possible results. In a lot of cases, you won't need to. You can just grab a can and paint on a piece of wood straight away. It doesn't matter. It kind of depends what kind of look you want to get, you want to achieve. With these 4, I'm going to get to like the best possible results that you can get. So when it comes to especially plaster, when it's a plaster that hasn't been prepared before, and by the way I'm talking about bricks and blocks and concrete and stones, only that haven't been painted before. So what you want to do is get some water-based paint, and you can mix it 50-50. So you mix 50% paint, 50% water. You paint it onto your plaster. Actually 50 is a bit much. 20% water and 80% paint. I have to do the maths there. So if you do that, it's gonna give you a thin paint that you can apply onto your plaster. You'll see it's very patchy, but at the same time it goes straight inside, and it will be really giving it like an anchor basically of a boat. It'll just really soak into that. So once you've done that, so let's just go with a dotted line. So that is for walls, you're applying just normal paint, any water-based paint, doesn't matter. Quick note, if you're using masonry paint, make sure you use that only on the outside, not inside, because it's got mold resistance inside. It's not really good for us to breathe that stuff. So if it's masonry, keep it outside. If it's just emulsion, for example, then it's fine. So you mix it with a bit of water, 20-80, and then after that you just put a layer of water-based paint without any water, just as it is in the tin, and then you put another one, and then you'll be good to go. With walls, if you want to really get a good product, a good start, then you can go with 3 coats. Depending on the country you live in and the paint that you have, you'll have more or less choice. In the UK, in France, in America, in Germany, oh my god, and in Poland as well, I mean, and in Austria, really good choices. So you can have all sorts of paints. But in France, my god, it's so expensive for the paint, it's crazy. The UK is pretty good actually, and America as well. Okay, cool. So wood. When it comes to wood, there is a difference between a piece of wood that hasn't been painted before and a piece of wood that has. So I'll just go straight into one of the main rules of painting, and that's talking about water and oil. As a lot of you have heard before, you can't mix water with oil. You can, but this is not for this lesson. I think I'm talking about it in lesson number 6 or something. When it comes to actually painting one at a time, not mixing water and oil together, when it comes to painting one at a time, you want to put water-based paint, then oil-based paint. You never want to put oil-based paint first, lay it dry, then do the water-based paint. To contradict myself, you can, but the only way you can do that is by sanding your oil-based paint. But it needs to be thick enough. So you need to have at least 2 coats of oil-based paint, lay it dry, put 1 coat, lay it dry, put a 2nd coat, lay it dry, then you can sand it, and then you can put your water-based paint on. Or if you're painting on, say, a door, for example, and it's you don't know what it's painted with, and if it looks like it's been done quite a few years ago, then it's definitely being painted with oil-based paint. You can sand it, and then you can paint it with your water-based paint, and it'll be fine. But if you paint it straight away with water, it'll just come off, it'll flake, it'll crack, it won't work. Okay, so with wood, if it's a piece of wood that's never been painted before, use water-based primer, not oil-based primer. Great thing about water-based is that it'll go straight inside the wood like the plaster, and it'll create a really good anchor. Oil-based paint won't do that. So if you want to use an oil-based primer, use water-based first, then use oil-based after. So what you can do is, when you get your water-based primer, if you see that the paint you bought is quite thin, and when you're painting it doesn't really cover, then that's great. Do 2 coats of that and it'll be fine. But in a lot of cases, every time, especially nowadays, I see primer, wood primer, that's very thick, and they'll say 1 coat primer. But it's just silly, because there's no such thing as a 1 coat primer. The whole purpose of primer is to be thin, to go inside the paint, whether it's plastic, metal, wood, whatever. It needs to be thin, and it's a matter of layers. You put a thin paint on, you lay dry, you put more paint, more paint, more paint, and then you got something really strong. You can't just put a thick coat and expect it to last over time, because over time it'll just flake, and that's just the end of it. So when it comes to wood, get a water-based primer, put a bit of water in the primer, and when it's done, you put a coat of water-based primer without any water, and then you can do your artwork straight away. Personally, what I like to do is I like to do 2 coats, so then it gives me a good surface to work to, and then from that, then we can move on to the next step. Plastic uses something called an adhesion promoter, and this is the term for the plastic primer. So when I use it, it comes in a can. I'm not actually sure if you can get it in a tin and a brush kind of format. I'm pretty sure you can, but I get it in when I'm painting a car and I'm painting the plastic bumper, then I'll be using an adhesion promoter. So what I do is I dust it on first. So you've got dust coats and wet coats. So I'll do it here. This is a dust coat, and this is a wet coat. So when you're using a primer, any type of primer, it'll be true. Especially, no, let's not go into that. So with a plastic primer, adhesion promoter, you want to dust it on. I'll do the dots for the dust. And then once you've done that, you wait about, say you're painting a bumper of a car, so you'll put the primer like this, you'll wait say 10 minutes, then you'll do that again. You dust it on. Once you've done that, you wait a further 10 minutes, now you put a wet coat. And then you're gonna, once you've done that, so the way to make the paint strong is to apply heat to the paint, or what is called curing, heat curing. There are different ways. You can use an oven in a booth if you're painting a car. They're great. They've got suction for the overspray and so on, and then they turn into an oven. But they're not always an option, because I know in France you can rent them, but in the UK I've struggled to find them. I was painting a car a few years ago, and I actually found a garage that, because I paid them to do the lacquer, they allowed me to do the artwork and the prep inside the booth. But apart from that, in the UK most people won't rent them to you. In places like in America, where painting a car, customizing a car is quite common, I'm pretty sure it's easier, do let me know. And in other countries, I don't know. But if you don't have a booth, what you can do is use a heat gun. I've actually painted all the cars I've painted. I used the heat gun, and it works fine. I painted a car for a client, and 6 years later, which was recently, 6 years later, they called me and they said, we've had a crash on the front bumper. Could you come around? We've bought a new bumper. Could you do the artwork again on the bumper to match the car? And what I did before, I saw that the paint work was fine. You know, everything was like, as they picked it up on the first day, it was just the same. It was fine. So a heat gun is a really good option. You can use UV lamps. Personally, I've never used them, so I'm not going to tell you whether they're good or bad. I just know people use them. So with regards to the primer, or to any steps that I'm about to say, to make that coat that you just applied strong, you use a heat gun. And the way to do that, you put the heat gun on full power, and most of the time they go two settings, they go low and high. Put it on full, but move at a good pace. You don't want to move too quickly, but you don't want to stay there either, otherwise you're just going to burn the paint. You can use a hairdryer, but only if you got like a really strong hairdryer, and in most cases hairdryers only go to like 900 watts. A heat gun is more like 1500 watts kind of thing, so a hairdryer won't really work. But a heat gun is like 20 quid, $20, so get one of those, it's really useful. Okay, so dust coat, wet coat. Now actually I'm going to use a color for the heat gun. So that's going to be heat gun. And now you can apply a second coat. So that's the second coat of primer, of adhesion promoter. And then you can heat it again, and then you're ready for the artwork. Personally, what I like to do, if I'm painting a van and everything is going to be done with spray cans, I'll do the step again, but with a spray can. So I'll dust on top of the adhesion promoter, and then I'll do a wet coat, heat gun, wet coat, so on. But if I'm using an airbrush and I'm using those water-based paints that I use, then I would put these water-based paints onto a spray gun, spray the entire car or the bumper, and then do my artwork there. I wouldn't mix the solvent-based paint than the airbrush water-based paint, because as I said before, oil and water wouldn't really mix. I would have to paint this quite thick and let it dry and cure it and then sand it, and then I can go with my water-based paint. Bit of a faff, it's a bit pointless, so I don't do it that way. Metal, if we're talking about painting on bare metal that you may have seen that's always got a bit of rust on, a bare metal you want to use an etching primer, and in this way you can sort of get the metal ready to go. It's not going to rust, it's going to be good. But we're going to assume you're painting on a car, and the car is we're going to assume you're painting on a car, and it's already got its paint from the factory. So all you do is sand. I haven't done the sanding on there yet, but and actually I think I should. So we're going to use like the sanding. Plastic, if it's unpainted, then you go straight with the promoter. Same with wood and so on. But metal, we're going to assume it's a car, and the car has already got paint and lacquer, so you sand it. So that's going to be the sanding. Then you're going to use, you're not going to use an etching primer if it's a car that's already got paint on it. So you're going to use a metal primer. Same thing. Dust it on, one coat, wait 10 minutes. Another coat, wait, and then a wet coat of metal primer. Then heat gun or booth, whatever. Primer again. Heat gun. So now everything is ready to go. And I guess when it comes to wood, what you want to do is just let it dry naturally with time. When it comes to wood, if you were to use a heat gun, which is fine, you want to put it on a low setting, but you're basically helping it. You're not using it like the metal or the plastic, where you actually, this is the speed I would go on. Yeah, it's about right. I would go like this on full speed. I'd go on full power, I'd go about this speed to dry the paint. If I was to go slower, I'd start burning the paint. So you want to move at a good pace. With wood, I'd put it on either low power, and I'd go like this, or I'd put it on full power, stand further back, and sort of go like that. You don't want to rush wood too much, otherwise it's just going to crack, and the paint is just going to separate from the wood. Basically it's going to separate from the wood. So the best thing is let it dry naturally. Okay, so now that you've done this, you've got a surface that's primed. Now what you can do is go straight with your artwork. But if you want to be really, if you want a really good surface, then what you can do is have one more step, which I normally do. Again, walls, now we're ready for artwork, and we're going to do, which color? Blue? I had a pink, but I lost it. Whatever. Okay, so now we're going to do artwork, and when it comes to walls, that will be pretty much it. There's one more step, which I'll talk about in a sec, but when it comes to walls, straight away, that's it. With these ones, now that they've been primed, you can just do your artwork. But the step I like to do in between is just one more layer of the paint I'm about to use before I do the artwork. So we're going to use some orange for that. And I'm going to talk about each one. So when it comes to wood, say if I'm using acrylics, then I will use, hang on, let me think about wood. Okay, so now that you've done the primer, you want to paint it one coat of paint before you do your artwork. So when it comes to wood, say if I'm using acrylic, then I would just use either the primer again, or I would use anything that's water-based. So maybe I'll use actually even acrylic, and I'll paint 2 wet coats of either of a flat color. So in most cases I'll use white. So I'll go wet, wet, and then I'll do the artwork. If I'm using spray cans, it'd be the same. So I'll do 2 coats of spray in white or whatever color I'm doing, and then I'll do my artwork. I don't want to mix. At that point, after I've done the primers, I want to stay within the same family of paint, whether it's water or oil, solvent, or cellulose, all that kind of stuff. It's good to stay within the same paint. Okay, so now on to plastic. Now that I've done my primer, if I'm using water-based paints, say if I'm using water-based airbrush paints, I would do a dust coat. And actually it's the same if I was using spray cans. I would dust it on first, then I would do, nope, that's it, that's right. Then I would do 1 wet coat. You guessed it. Heat gun. Then wet coat again. Then heat gun. And then artwork. Okay, and at this point when it comes to metal, it'd be exactly the same thing. So dust coat, wet coat, and heat gun in between. Once I'm done with that, then I do the artwork. As you can see, this is a car. Not talking about rubber, plastic and metal, pretty much what you find on cars. Yes, I think that's about it. So, as you can see, the steps to painting a car, and we're not done yet, you've got quite a few. If you're painting a van, for example, with spray cans, obviously you can just roll up and just paint the whole thing. But if you want to do it properly, it gets, especially when you're using an airbrush and airbrush paints, then it gets quite tricky. And this way, I'm actually describing doing it properly, whether it's with an airbrush or with cans, just going over the top to make it look good. Right. So on all of these, we've done the artwork. Now we're gonna start finishing. So you've got your prep, your artwork, and now you're finishing the work to make it look as good as possible. So for that, we're gonna use another color. I'm gonna use a pink. Okay. When it comes to a wall, you can obviously leave the artwork as it is, done, or you can put a lacquer on top. So the lacquer that you'll put, you can either get, you can go to a car shop where they sell lacquer and paint the car with lacquer, or there are other types of protection, but they pretty much work in the same way. And what you want to do is just roll it on, two coats of wet lacquer, and that's going to be a mural saved. You can use, if you're using a gloss lacquer, then obviously it's going to show, but if you use matte lacquer, it's not going to look like you've protected the wall at all, but it will. So if you think maybe people are going to do some graffiti on the work, maybe paint it with a gloss lacquer, it'd be easier to clean. And if not, if you just want to make sure it lasts for many years, just put a matte lacquer on top and you won't even see that you've applied a lacquer. That being said, these cans are so good. I've actually seen some of my work that I've done more than 10 years ago, and the colors are exactly the same, and it's just as good. So in most cases, you don't actually need to lacquer a wall, just leave it as it is. Okay, onto wood. So now that you've done your artwork, you're gonna go with your lacquer. So you can use different lacquers, and I'm going to talk about the same for each three material. So you can use a spray gun, you can use a roller or a brush, or you can use a spray can. The way they work, when you're using a spray gun or a brush, it's the same thing. It's just you're just using a different tool to apply. It's 2/3 lacquer, 1/3 hardener. Anyway, so when you're applying those, if you're using a brush or a spray gun, you do your mix, and then you're going to apply it the way I'm about to talk about. If you're using a spray can, you've got two different versions, but you apply it the same way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the spray cans, the only difference between a spray can and a spray gun or using a brush is that you've got more thinner inside the can in order for the whole mix to come out of the can. When you're using a spray gun, for example, there's no thinner. You just got lacquer, hardener, and you working on top. With this, you got hardener, lacquer, thinner. So when you're using a can, just know that you need to put more than if you were using a brush or a spray gun. And even though when you're painting it, it may look good, by the time it dries, you'll realize that it's actually, when the thinner evaporates, you're actually left with a lot less than you thought you had. Okay, so again, it works in the same way as this. When you're doing your lacquer, you're going to go with it, at this point, they're all the same. So you go with your dust coat, and you're going to do two coats of lacquer that you're going to dust on like this. Wait 10 minutes and do it again, just to make it kind of tacky. It's like spraying glue. Lacquer is a lot more sticky than these paints are. And when you're painting a car, say you're painting in a garage, you'll realize that it's not ideal, because then it stays so sticky for a long time. Any bits of dust and whatever, bugs and whatever, are going to go onto the paint, and even though you finish with a really good job, by the time you come back the next day or so on, you're going to see you've got to work on that. You've got to sand it, you've got to buff it, you've got to do all that work. So as much as possible, working in the booth is perfect, because you've got extractor fans below and above the car, so that works pretty good. Okay, so you've done your dust coats. You wait 10 minutes in between. Now you're doing your wet coat. Now you're using the heat gun. And you do a wet coat again. And then heat gun again. Cool. And at this point, now you want to let the car dry. So if you're using a booth, then obviously this is not for wood. Well, it could be. Actually, let's just say it is. So for all those three, you could be using a booth, and then you put it on the low heat. Not going to go into that. I just want to keep it simple. But whatever you're using, now you just want to let the mix sort of dry a bit. So you've got 2 coats of lacquer on the whole thing. Just lay it dry overnight, and then when you come back the next day, you can work on it. Okay, so now you come back the next day, and before you can apply more lacquer or polish, what you want to do is sand it. So when it comes to the grit again, now you don't want to use anything thick. You want to use the minimum you would use, 600 grit, but you're more likely to use probably 1,000 or maybe even higher. But at this stage, really you're around between 600 and 1,000. So you sand your lacquer. And for this, you really need to make sure the lacquer is dry and hard. It does take quite a while for the lacquer to dry. So when you put your nail through, you'll see that it goes in. But don't worry, after a while, it'll bounce back. It's a bit like rubber kind of thing. So once you've sanded it a bit, then you basically go back to this step, and you apply as many coats as you want. I did the roof of a car. I painted howling wolf on the roof, and as I said, I asked the guys. Well, I paid the guys to lacquer it for me, and the guys said they put 11 coats of lacquer on top of the work, and that was airbrushed. If it was spray cans, they would have probably said we put 25 coats. It really adds up really quickly. You can see the amount of layers and steps we've got already. So if you want to really smooth, so imagine we're looking at the paint. So we've got the primer, the paint, the artwork, the whatever. So it's kind of looking like this when you do the artwork, because that's the only one that's uneven. You know, you're going to keep working on the eyes, the eyebrows, whatever you're doing. So it's going to look like that. So to make it flat, you need to compensate with more or less lacquer. On the car, you're looking at around a minimum, you're looking at about 6 coats, maybe 8 coats of paint. Or in that case, it was 11, and sometimes you can go even higher. But if you're done with this and you don't want to do too many coats, then you just have 2. And after that point, you can just polish the work. You can either, if you're happy with the finish, you don't need to sand it, you just leave it as it is. Or you can use an abrasive compound, which is really fine, and it kind of works like sandpaper, but it's quite fine. And by rubbing it, it'll take a bit of the gloss away, but it will also remove the imperfections, the dust or whatever that's been on there. So you'll have a really decent work, but it won't be high gloss. To get a really high gloss, amazing looking car, you need a booth. There's just no 2 ways about it. It's just how it is. You need no dust, many layers, the right amount of heat and drying time and so on. Again, I'm not going to talk about cars. I just want to keep it to the material. So at this point, I mentioned if you want, you can polish it. So you can use, say, a 600 or maybe 1,000 grit sandpaper. Once you've done that, you can just put polish on your work, and just use either a polishing wheel or do it by hand and just polish your work and you'll be done. And this is how you get a really good surface on the work. Do keep in mind that, and I'm guessing I will talk about this in the pricing section at the end of this course, but I don't even have to say this, but I will anyway. You can see all these steps, and if you're painting a car and you're gonna have many more coats a layer, I'll run out of space because there'll just be so many layers. Compared to a wall where you might just do the artwork or maybe prepare it a bit and there's not much to it, you can see the difference. And this is why if I'm painting a van just using spray cans, it'll be between 1,000 to 2,000 pounds in most cases. But if I'm using airbrushes and spray guns and all that stuff, it'll be around 10, 15, maybe 20,000 pounds. And if it's a truck, then it'll go even higher. I mean, most of the time I would paint a truck with, I've never actually painted a truck, I've painted vans. That's the biggest I've done as far as vehicles. But if I was to paint a truck with airbrushes, I mean, we're talking about a long time, a big space, many steps, you know, so you have to factor this when you're pricing your work. But I'll talk more about this when I'm talking about pricing the work. Okay, I hope this has made sense and I haven't confused you too much. I know I probably did and probably lost you at some point, but if I didn't, I'm glad. If you got any questions, please put them in the comments below. Other people, feel free to answer them for me, and if I can, if I've got the time, I will answer them as well. If this video was not too confusing, please give it a thumbs up. If not, give it a thumbs down or don't, whatever you want to do. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. It helps me see that I'm actually doing something positive when I'm seeing that when more people are subscribing to my work, and it makes me want to do more videos. If you want to help me with a bit of money, you can go to the link in the description. It'll take you to my website where you can donate $1, £1, $5, 5 million, whatever, and it helps me to finance these videos that I just finance by myself. So any help is welcome. But if not, just enjoy the show, and I will see you on the next video. And the topic for next time will be colors. So see you guys soon. Bye.